So tonight, it's going to be a great night. Esther, we're in the book of Esther. We're studying the book of Esther. So what I'm going to do, like I promised you on Sunday, you get the grand opportunity of texting in questions tonight. And so what's going to happen is they're going to put up a slide that they're going to have up there for the whole during the message. So if I see you on your phones, you have permission. So this is kind of like to do that. So this is the question. This is the number right here. And so what will happen is maybe something sticks out to you in the message, and there's a question about the message that you're like, I just wanted to know about that. Tina Marconi in the back last week was after the message. She's like, what do you think they meant by this part in this chapter? I was like, oh, that's a really good point that I did not bring up in the message. So I know that there is questions. Also the number, what it's for, is if you have questions about faith, you're at your work, and you're like, somebody asked you a question, and you're like, that I'd love to know the answer to that. Or it might be something that you've read. And so the idea is at the end of the service is an opportunity for us just to have a conversation. If there's not a lot of pressing questions, we'll move on. But just wanted to give an opportunity, mix it up a little bit, and to have an opportunity for you to share, and we can do this together. So that is what's going to happen. So we are in Esther 2. I'm going to read it. Here we go. It's a little long. Later, when King Xerxes' fury had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what she had decreed about her. Then the king's personal attendant proposed, "Let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. The king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful young women into the harem of the citadel of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let beauty treatments be given to them. Then let the young women who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. Now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Yair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken captive with Jehoiakim, king of Judah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadashah, who he brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman, who was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure. She was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter, with her father and mother died. When the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many young women were brought to the citadel of Susa and put under the care of Haggai. Esther also was taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Haggai, who had charge of the harem. She pleased him and won his favor. Immediately he provided her with the beauty treatments and special food. He assigned to her 7 female attendants selected from the king's palace and moved her and her attendants into the best place in the harem. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. Before a young woman's turn came to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given to her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go there. In the morning return to another part of the harem to the care of Shaggaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. When the turn came for Esther, the young woman Mordecai had adopted, the daughter of her uncle Abihail, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the harem, suggested. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month on the 4th of Tebeth in the 7th year of his reign. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. But Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do. For she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when she was bringing her up. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bagthana and Teresh, who were the king's officials who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And the report was investigated and found to be true. The two officials were impaled on poles. All this was recorded in the book of the annals of the presence of the king. I mean, you read the book of Esther and you're like, wow, this is like, all it is about a bunch of drunk rich people. No, I mean, the king getting drunk, having parties, making bad decisions, then going out, finding a bunch of concubines, bringing them in, picks the one he likes, and then people end up dying on sticks at the end of the day because they were trying to kill him. You know, it doesn't seem like it's like a really good story. It's not something also that you would feel like, wow, I just want to read this to my kids at night. See what happens, little Johnny. You tell a lie, you're going to be impaled on a pole. I mean, so I think when you come to the Bible, when you come to this story like Esther, there's a lot of questions that maybe come to your mind. Like, God, what are you trying to communicate to us? What's this story really all about? You know, most of the Bible, when you look at the stories in the Bible, and you look at the books of the Bible, are written from places of pain. They're not written at the height of rejoicing. They're written from places of pain. If you look at all the prophets, what are they doing? Don't do this. The bad guy's coming. You need to stop. You need to stop. You need to stop. If you look at even in through the book of Exodus and Genesis, they're just riddled with really, really rough stories of a wandering nomad named Abraham, and who was given land, but when he died, he didn't have the land. But one day he's going to get the land. Then it keeps continuing on the story of Joseph. And, well, I have a great vision. I have a great dream, brothers. Oh, I'll show you about a great dream. And then he's in a slave, and then he's in Egypt. I mean, so if you look at the Bible, you see that there's just a tremendous amount of stories that deal with pain or people in pain. And the question is, God, what are you doing? How will you fulfill your promise and your purpose? So in chapter 2 of Esther, I saw three things. I see the regret of decisions, the deporting of a nation, and an unlikely queen. So the regret of decisions, deporting of a nation, and an unlikely queen. In Esther chapter 2, the regret of decisions. It starts off at the end of chapter 1 with this really lavish banquet. The King Xerxes, who was the king of the world, he was the king of the Persians and the Medes, and he's this king. He's conquered. 3 years have gone by. He's basically crushed all of the uprising. He's sitting in this fortified city, and what he says is, I'm just going to have a party, and it's going to be a really, really long party. So he just gets drunk for about 180 days. So then in the middle of it, he gets this great idea. I want to see the queen. And the queen's like, I'm not coming in there. So she tells him that, and he gets really, really angry. And so what you do when you're normally intoxicated is you make really great decisions. And so then what he does is he goes, what I'm going to do, he gets his A team together, and they say, I got a great idea. Let's banish her. And he's like, great idea. Why didn't I think of this before? So they banish her. So the beginning of chapter 2, verse 1 says this. Later, when King Xerxes' fury had subsided, he remembered. So he's sober now. He's all alone. And the beginning of chapter 2 tells us he remembered. He remembered what? Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. The regret of decisions. You see here King Xerxes, who had everything, who with his power was kind of flexing his muscle to the world. I'm in charge. When he's met with Queen Vashti, who won't listen to him, he flexes his power. I'll show you. Banishes her from ever seeing him again. And when the party dies down and the noise becomes quiet, he sits there in regret, wondering, what did I do? The thing is about regret over past mistakes. Past failures tend not to live in the past. So you see right here, after everything's done, past failures a lot of times becomes today's fixations. They become what you think about. They become what you're consumed about. You can't think of today, you can't think of tomorrow all you can think about is what had happened. So in this story, this person who is the most powerful person in the world is fixated on a past mistake or failure. Why did this happen? So maybe he could have made some decisions to change. Maybe I shouldn't drink as much. We'll find out later he doesn't stop drinking. Maybe I should restore Vashti somehow. That's not a decision he makes. Or the third idea I thought, well, maybe I should fire the guy who gave me such bad advice because he took somebody else's advice. He doesn't do any of those, but instead what he does, his personal attendant sees the king in pain, sees the king frustrated, sees the king living in past regret. And he goes, you know what will make you feel better? Let's find another beautiful queen. And he's like, great idea. So a bad idea, and yesterday's mistakes become tomorrow's problems in some way. So instead of dealing with the issue, dealing with how he got into the mess, he takes more great advice from personal assistants, and off he goes. Because he's king of the world, he can go tell anybody to do anything he wants. So he goes, and the personal assistant had this great idea. Let's go out and find all the beautiful people of the world, and let's bring them into your harem. So he's like, that's a win for me. So he's like, sure, go ahead and do that. So they go. They find all these people. And that gets into the next part of the story. The regret of decisions, living in the past, living with the pain of the past, deals to the story of a deported nation. What it does is in verses 1 through 4, talk about this decision that King Xerxes makes. Verse 5, then what it does is it gives us a picture of this people, Esther and Mordecai, and where they came from. The two people that we're introduced to, their names, Esther and Mordecai, are not Jewish names. They derive from different things we'll get to in a second. But they're a family. Esther had lost both of her parents. Was it because of the deportation? Was it because of harsh conditions? We don't know. We just know that she was grew up young without parents. Her uncle at that moment said, I'll raise you, takes her in, and they're living together. You can imagine Mordecai's surprise when one day his daughter, there's a caravan comes up and says, hey, the king has decreed we're going to take all the young women and we're going to take them off to the king. Okay? And at that moment, Mordecai really can't do anything about it. This small, probably Jewish community living inside of this huge empire, no power. How's God going to do what he's going to do? And this bad decision has now caused consequences to me. So she has to go. When she goes and she moves forward, she goes in. She goes into the capital. She's met by a couple people. One of them in particular is this one who shows favor to her. He's a eunuch. Now that might sound weird. Why would they do that? But to be a eunuch in this time was actually a place of power. You are giving up your family, your future, your ability to have a family. I mean, what you would invest your time into is the investment of the state. You would want to see the state thrive, and you became a person of power because they put you in really high positions. And they didn't want you threatening the kingdom in any way, such or form. So you can imagine that today. I don't think it would work. But you would say, hey, if you want to be a position of power in the United States, you got to be a eunuch. I don't know if that would really go over too well. But back when everybody that had power had to protect their power, and they didn't want anybody marrying or doing anything they shouldn't be doing, they said, you have to give something up. And it was a pretty costly thing to give up your family that way. So here is this family that's been deported from their home. They're living as immigrants in this country. The king has ordered all these young women into the castle. Mordecai works for the state, so he's a kind of a guardsman. And so the curiosity of the story is, God, what is happening here? Bad decisions by people of power, the consequences of decisions falling out everywhere. You know, about their names, it's interesting. Mordecai has only a Gentile name. We don't have his Jewish name at all. In fact, from the name actually comes from the Babylon god of Marduk. So here's some irony. One of the heroes of the story is named after the god who is the god of the Babylonians, right? The Medes and the Persians beat the Babylonians. So the god of the Babylonians gets crushed by the gods of the Medes and the Persians. Mordecai, he is given a name after Marduk, who's the god of the Babylonians. And the story is about the God of Israel. And so here's a guy who's got a name, who's named after a god who lost the battle to the Medes and Persians. Here he is serving as a Jewish man inside of this larger context of a nation who's not Jewish. And the question is, what's happening? His daughter just gets taken off. And you can imagine Mordecai working through what is going on? What's the end of the story? But what the author does is, in some sense, he talks about this guy and his heritage. Look what it says in verse 5. Now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, the son of Kish. Now, some people would say that this genealogy traces to that of Saul. So Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. He was Israel's first king. And I think what the author is doing is showing a similarity, because Mordecai, who has a Gentile name, he's been deported into this country, not by his own will, in some essence will be a hero of the story in a way that Saul was not a hero in Israel. We also know here about Esther. Her Hebrew name, they actually give it to us in verse 7. Hadassah, I guess, I don't even know how to say it. It's missing the Greek version and the rest of, and it seems to mean myrtle, and thus fits with a number of Hebrew females' names derived from the plant names. So her name, Hebrew name, but it's changed to the word Esther. Esther is less certain. It may derive from a Persian word that means star, or from the name of the Babylonian goddess Ishtar. There are probably two good explanations as to why Mordecai's foster daughter has dual names. Her Jewish name may have been the name she used in Jewish circles, and Esther was the one she used in the larger, predominantly Gentile world. So when I was reading through the story, I just think of the pain, not only that Esther had to go through, but also the uncertainty of her future. Realize not only is she Jewish, so she has no predominance, in her role as being taken into a harem, she has no power. I mean, you can imagine the implication. A powerless, seemingly powerless person. How will God use her in her story to speak to, that we see at the end here, to a person of power? What we find out here, there's this story of she comes into the harem, just like Joseph did when he came in to the jail. When Joseph was brought into the jail, he had won favor with the jailer, just like he had won favor with Potiphar. And so here's the story of Joseph. Now we see the story of Esther. She's brought into the harem, and she wins favor with this eunuch. He tells her what to do. He gives her all the things that she needs. And what she does is, when her turn is to be presented to the king, she could take anything she wants, and she asks the eunuch, what should I bring? And he tells her, this is what I would do. And she listens to his counsel, and she does that. The story goes on to tell, interesting, they skip the part where they get married. I don't know if that's too, this is kind of, I think in some sense, a kind of a scandalous story between a Jewish person. Like, you would never, ever imagine marrying a Gentile king. Like, that's not supposed to happen. But what we do here from the story, what we see here, it says, now the king was attracted, verse 17, to Esther more than to any other woman, and she won his favor and the approval more than any other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And so you see this obscure person, this Jewish immigrant, instead of a larger nation. She has her Jewish name she goes by in her inner circles, taken off against her will placed in this harem, wins favor with the eunuch, wins favor with the king. And now at the end of chapter 2, she becomes queen. So a person of no power to almost complete power within a series of a couple, whether months, maybe a year or two. We know that the story here, there's probably about 3 to 4 years difference between when the king threw the banquet, was really despondent, to the time that she becomes queen. So you have in this story the regret of decisions. Xerxes makes horrible decisions. He lives with the consequences of his decisions every day, the mistakes that he made. That doesn't stop him from making mistakes. He makes worse mistakes moving forward. You see this deported nation in this person of insignificance becoming a person of significance. And lastly, she becomes the unlikely queen. And I think what God is doing and showing through the book of Esther, while his name is never mentioned, God's name is never mentioned officially. What is happening is God gives her a voice, and he gives her power, and that power that he gives her is for a purpose. Now, what we don't know, because we haven't finished reading the rest of the story, is what is God doing? How is God moving in spite of this incredibly horrible situation? What would God be doing and communicating? I think about it too as, what is God doing to the people that are reading this book? You know, I can imagine the people that when the book of Esther was written and people would read it, what do you think they thought about? Were they despondent? Because it happened in between, the storyline is in between Ezra and Nehemiah, is when the story of Esther happened. Imagine it. You get this book, you're reading it, you're not in your homeland, you have no influence or power. You're like, and on top of it, God, I'm living with other people's bad decisions and poor decisions. I'm having to suffer consequences from people in their life making decisions that affect me personally. I mean, when you look at it, Esther really had no control of any of the thing that was going on. But what we see here, this unlikely queen, is that God is with her through all these places where she seems to have no influence. I mean, for instance, her Mordecai, the dad that took her in, he told her twice, don't ever mention you're Jewish. And on top of it, use your Gentile name. Don't let anybody know. So you tell us to forget about our promises, you tell us to forget about our past, and he's like, you just got to trust me. I mean, it mentions it twice for him not to do that. Verse 10, it says, Haman restrained him, I'm sorry, in the wrong chapter. Esther 2:10, it says, Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her. So she honestly is moving by faith. She doesn't know what's going to happen next in the story. She doesn't know that she's going to be put into a position of favor and power. But I believe Esther believes something about God. She might not have understood the past. She might not understand the decisions that other people have made that she has no power over to control. So she listens. I mean, if you look at her story in chapter 2, she listens to the eunuch who gives her advice. She listens to her Mordecai who gives her advice. And then what happens is, the fascinating part of it, and the last part, and I'm going to close with this, there was this plot, and it kind of seems like, why are they telling you this? In verse 19 and 20, when Esther had kept secret her family background, just as Mordecai had told her, she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done with her bringing up. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Mordecai heard about this plot, and she goes and tells the king. You know what's kind of impressive to me when I was reading this? Is that when she told the king, she gave credit to the person who it was due. She didn't tell the king, yeah, I found this out, I want to let you know. She actually says, if you look at it in verse 22, she says, but Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. So here's the thing. She is not abusing power to gain power. The opposite is about her story. All the bad things that could probably happen to her, being taken into a harem, not being able to marry another Jewish person. I mean, when you think about it, in her story, this is not the way that's ideal, not the way that I was supposed to grow up, maybe not the way that I saw that. My parents are dead. I'm being raised by this guy Mordecai. He's a great guy. And you see that she has no power and no influence. And what she does is she will not claim that power to use it against other people. She actually gives it away. She was actually king. It wasn't I who figured this out. It was Mordecai who figured it out. I just wanted to let you know. She had no problem with releasing that power to other people to give credit to other people. And so what I noticed about her story here is that she goes, power is not something that I assume because I'm the king. It's because she's in contrast to King Xerxes, who says, I got all the power in the world, but the guy's living with poor decisions. He's living with guilt. He's living with all these things. Who would be the person you think should live with that? Esther, and it's opposite. She doesn't live with any of it, or the story doesn't tell us that. She's got handed a really bad deck. And what does she do? By faith, take steps day after day. She doesn't know what the outcome's going to be, and she gives credit to who credit is due. She allows, in this story, God's going to use her to be a person of influence, a person who was born in obscurity, a person that had no influence. At the end of the story, she'll become a person of influence. And you know what? I bet you if Esther never had that influence, she'd probably be the same person. And so my last thing is this. You don't know what God's going to do. And the last thing is from Jeremiah the prophet, what he told the people of Israel. Jeremiah chapter 29. Jeremiah said this, or God said this to the people of Israel when they would go into the land. This is what he said, Jeremiah 29, verse 7. This is God giving the people of Israel instruction. What do you do when I'm allow you to be captives in this land? What are you going to do? How are you going to live? How's this going to work out? And God's giving the people instruction. This is what I want you to do when you're in a foreign land and nothing makes sense. Verse 7, seek the peace and prosperity of the city of which I've carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. What he says to them is, hey, listen, you're going to be carried away into exile. Things are going to happen. I want you to go into that place where you feel like you're powerless, and I want you to prosper that city. I want you to pray for it. You have a responsibility to it. If you like it or not, you have a responsibility to a place where you feel powerless. You pray to me because I'm in charge of that king. If he knows it or not, I'm in charge of him. And so the calmness and the steadiness of Esther is a tremendous story to us. All right, we're going to do some questions here. This will be fun. Are you ready? Maybe. Okay. Oh, look at this question. Do you know if Mordecai ever returned to Jerusalem? From what I've noticed in the story, it seems like Mordecai, it's really interesting in the chronology. I was reading a bunch about it. I don't know. I don't think he did. I think Ezra and Nehemiah, and part of the frustration in the book of Esther is this. There are some people stuck in the Medes and the Persians that were carried away. They never got to go home, but their friends did. But they didn't. So you can imagine, dude, I just got rounded up and put in a harem, and they're going back to Jerusalem? Are you kidding me? This is even a worse deal for me. So I don't think he did. I think he stayed and prospered the city is my opinion. Next question. How should we deal with regret over bad decisions? What you see here in the story of Esther is this king who's not a Christian. Somebody actually had to come alongside of him to talk him out of to get into another bad decision. So I think to relieve or numb some of the pain. If you look through the whole book of Esther, all they're doing is partying all the time and getting drunk all the time because he can't deal with reality. I mean, that's a 180-day party, and they're going to have more parties and more parties and more parties and more parties. You see Esther, as soon as he becomes queen, let's party. I think he's not dealing with reality in that sense. So how should we deal with regret over bad decisions? I think the one thing that helps me out is to realize that every decision, bad decision I've made, that I know that not only does God love me, but the depth of his love for me, I know will cover those bad decisions, and it's constantly giving it to him. So I remind myself of the bad decision, or it comes to me, not by choice. I have to release it back to him. I said, God, you've covered this, and it's not mine to carry, and if I do, it'll crush me, but I give it to you. And it's a constant battle every day. That's why Paul says, I beat my body daily. There's a lot of things going on in that. Okay, here's another one. How could deception be looked on with favor like that Esther embraced? Part of the interesting story about Esther is because God's not really mentioned at all in the story. His name is never mentioned. So some people are like, what is God really doing with this story? It seems kind of odd. So how could deception be looked on with favor like when Esther embraced? I think part of the story is meant to bring you back to other stories where bad things happened. So I don't, and it doesn't really talk about Esther's personal interaction. I mean, she probably cried when she was taken in the harem, I imagine. It's a story like Joseph, and I'll use that as an example. When Joseph was sold into slavery, in the Hebrew, it actually said he was screaming for his life. I mean, the imagery is so graphic. I mean, they're literally putting handcuffs on him, roping him behind a bunch of camels, and the guy's screaming for his life. He didn't embrace it, but when he got into that place, he accepted it. And he said, God, you have me here. I have no power at all. So God, teach me about how you are sufficient no matter what. Because he didn't, and the story with Esther is very similar to the story of Daniel and his friends. Hey, you're going to do this. We've taken you. You're going to be king's assistants. Well, that's not what my 5-year plan was, but I guess it is now. So I think it is in some senses, I think she had some things about God that she believed that were bigger than her situation. And it's hard. I can't imagine any of that happening. Okay, should you call people out who have the power to put your personal cell number on the screen? What? Tina. Okay, so here's a good question. How do we stop living in the pain of the past? The pain of the past. So for me, I think the first thing to do is when you have a painful moment in the past, you don't suppress it, okay? So if that were the case and we were to do that, we might as well all be Buddhist, because Buddhism is trying to push down any type of emotion at all. So what happens is, and they have these moral values that they live by, so in some senses they're trying to deal with this pain. But in some senses, when the pain from the past hits you, the thing that you do is you recognize it, okay? This was a bad decision. Second thing that I do is, I even though I've confessed it, I confess it. God, will you forgive me for this decision? Or if it's something that happened to me, God, will you give me strength? God, will you, to deal with it? The third thing is, what I do is, I redirect my heart and my emotions by taking that feeling and I pray it to him and I redirect it on his goodness and what he's done for me. So I start to tell myself another story. Well, yes, this is the story of the past. I understand it, but here's the story of my present and my future. So what I don't do is I don't let the past overwhelm me, like kind of, because of what it does, it'll come like, like a lion, and you feel like you're, not that I've ever been attacked by a lion, but that's what I imagine it would be like, pretty suffocating. It holds on to you, you got claw marks into you, and you're like, I can't get out, I can't get out. You accept that there's a lion on you. You don't say, there's no lion, there's no lion, there's no lion. You accept it, you pray it, you communicate it to God. God, there's a lion on me, and I can't deal with this. And then what I start to do is I start to tell the story of what the gospel does for me. It frees me, it gives me peace, and I constantly push into it. I don't overcome. And it's sometimes it's with time that it happens to do that. No. That was, I know whose number that was, so no, I'm not answering that question. How different is Jeremiah's advice to the exiles than the mindset that the Israelites originally came into Canaan with? And why do you think it was so different? Oh, wow, okay, I should have read that one before I read it out loud. Then I have to commit to it. So I think the difference is that, if you look at the story of the exiles, the question is, God had brought them back into the land and said, this is your land, and these are your borders. And so what he had told them to do was to push out these people out. There's some verses in the Old Testament which give us a clue of why he's doing it. It doesn't tell us specifically about every people, but there are some clues in there to say that he was doing this to punish people who were in sin that have rebelled against him. And so some way God was actually using the people of Israel when they spread out to conquer the land. In some way, he was actually bringing judgment on some of the kings from that region. The difference is here is God says, because you Jewish people are in rebellion against me, I am going to push you into captivity. And when you get there, I want you to seek the peace of that city. And so what he did is he gave them command not to conquer Babylon, but actually quite opposite. He goes, I want you there to be a representative of my name in there. It doesn't mean that, now this is kind of a big issue because when the Assyrians came in and they took the southern kingdoms, the way that the Assyrian people did it is they took people and they scattered them back out, and they intermarried with them. And so today when you go to Israel, they're like, yeah, those other 10 tribes, we really don't know who's who. And so what they do is they were the top 2 tribes. When Babylon came in, they took them by chunks of people and they exported them into Babylon. And so it was a little bit different scenario. Assyria's way of messing with you as a culture, they would intermarry with you, and so that you would lose your ethnic identity, so that you couldn't say and so there wouldn't be any rebellion against the Assyrians. And so Jeremiah's advice was, hey, listen, the punishment that you're getting to receive, don't run from the punishment, press into the punishment. And actually do your job as by faith and live that way in this place that's not your home. And I will bring you back. Jeremiah talks about that later. I will bring you back into the land. All right. Well, those are all the questions, and it's 8:02. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pray for us as a church. I'm excited for this weekend. We're going to talk about the armor of God. So it'll be great. I don't know what I'm going to say yet, but it's coming to me. So let's pray together. So Lord Jesus, we thank you for this time together. Lord, we thank you for, God, what you're doing here at this church. And we just pray that you would encourage us. I mean, stories like Esther, Esther, I don't think she knew the reality of her future when she was young. But Lord, what you were there, and what we do know is that you will use her to speak to power. You will use her, this immigrant into a foreign country. You will use her to not only rescue her people, but you will use her in her faith and her boldness, Lord, in a way that she would never imagine. And that's what you want to do with us. You want to use our faith and God in a way. And so, Lord, I just pray our time here on this earth, until you renew all things, that you would give us power to prosper the city. Lord, we would be about seeing that your kingdom come. Lord, we'd seek the peace of the city, and Lord, that we be a people that would reflect you. So, Jesus, we thank you for this time together. In your name we pray. Amen.